So judging by a poll I recently put up, a lot of y'all want to see more automotive electrical wiring videos. So I thought, why not start with the most common upgrade in that department, and that's a car stereo. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you what tools I use, what principles I use when it comes to electrical wiring, why I use them, and all of this information will transfer over to anything electrical on your car, such as fuel pump relays, fan relays, etc. So it doesn't take a lot to do a job like this. Most common hand tools will get it done. You're going to need yourself a good pair of wire strippers or crimpers. This is a multi-tool unit. It can strip wires from 22 gauge all the way down to 10 gauge. So that'll cover 90% of what you're going to be doing in the automotive field. And it has these little sections for crimping butt connectors and such at the bottom. This has been my favorite pair so far. I've had this for a few years. This Craftsman pair is held up pretty sharp. You can also get these kind. They're considered automatic strippers. You don't have to gauge the wire. You just stick the wire through there. It kind of holds it down and strips it for you. I got wire cutters in the middle here and the same type of crimping mechanism. These are a little stiff. I hadn't used these much. Like I said, more than likely, if I'm doing an electrical job, I'm going to be using these Craftsman. And then you got some very basic ones here. These just cut and strip wire on this end, but I avoid using these at all costs. Most of the time, these are in my breakdown kit just for a backup. One of the most important tools you can have doing electrical work is a good multimeter. This is a Harbor Freight unit. I think this is like 20 bucks, but you can get a super cheap version for like $5 that does the basic principles of what you're going to need to do. But I definitely recommend a decent multimeter gauge. If you're going to be tapping into the fuse box, I definitely recommend picking up one of these fuse tap kits. It just gives you a safe way to add a power supply to an already full fuse box. You just stick this in the place of the existing fuse, and then you double fuse it here, and this gives you your power lead. That's a safer way to do it than just cramming a wire into the fuse box. But you can pick them up on Amazon or eBay. They're relatively cheap, and of course, some extra fuses goes a long way anytime you're doing electrical work. Depending on what type of job you're doing, you're also going to need some electrical wire. Now, this is some 10 gauge. It's pretty heavy stuff, but depending on what kind of job you're doing is going to determine what size wire you actually need. In this case, we're going to be looking at anything from 16 gauge to 20 gauge. So just keep that in mind. You can buy the single rolls per gauge, or you can buy a whole wire rack from Harbor Freight. I think I got one of those over here I could show you. And then if you're trying to keep it nice and neat looking, clean, I highly recommend picking up some heat shrink tubing. Like I said, most of this stuff can be had from Harbor Freight. That's multiple different sizes, multiple colors of heat shrink, and some short cable ties or zip ties. This just makes your job look a whole lot nice and neat. Just like anything else, you can definitely go crazy when it comes to tools for electrical equipment, but these tools will cover 90% of the jobs that you'll run into, so just keep that in mind. The next thing you need to consider is how are you going to make your connections. And 9 times out of 10, when I'm doing some electrical work, I resort to these heat shrink connectors. They got butt connectors, you got ring terminals, you got spade terminals, you got male terminals, female terminals. All of these crimp down like a regular crimp connector, but they also include a heat shrink coating already installed, so this takes out one less step that you have to do. I picked these up from Amazon. I buy them in a big bulk kit, and I just throw them in this like 20 bin storage bin from Harbor Freight. Now I'll show you a couple of examples of stuff that I do not like to use. I'm not exactly sure what these connectors are called, but I absolutely hate these things. They're nothing but a pain, and I do not recommend using these. Same goes for wire nuts. I see a lot of people, they'll use household wire nuts. on an automotive job, and I personally do not like these things. And then the last thing you'll see people use is electrical tape. Now, I try to steer clear of that. I don't actually have any to show you right now because I don't use it that often if I can help it. I do keep a roll in my emergency breakdown bag just for the off chance that I might need some. But if it comes down to me doing something at the shop, I'm going to be using these butt connectors and some heat shrink tubing, or these new connectors I got that I'm going to give a try today. Now, for the past 5 or 10 years, these have been the hot ticket, the crimp connectors with the heat shrinking already on them. But I've been seeing these new butt connectors for the last 3 or 4 years where they already got the solder built into them, and it's a heat shrink coating on the outside of that. So you could go the solder route, but a lot of people don't know how to solder or don't want to take the time to solder, and this just eliminates that step for you. It melts the solder and shrinks the heat coating on the outside at the same time. So I'm going to give those a try today on this stereo wiring harness and see how it goes. So I was actually installing a stereo into a lady's Jeep the other day, and she was just going to throw this old Kenwood away, or not Kenwood, it's a JVC, I think, but she was just going to throw it away, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So we cleaned it up, and I'm going to try to reuse it for Luke's truck. And I think the harness on this thing actually happens to be the same plug-in, so we're going to get lucky there on that deal. But I want to go through and reconnect all these wires because underneath here, all they did was twist them up, and at least they did put some heat shrink coating on the outside instead of electrical tape. So that is one step better than electrical tape, but I prefer a stronger connection than that. So what I'm going to do is trim these in the middle, and then we'll reconnect them using these new solder connectors. So when it comes to something like this job, this is a pretty straightforward job. It's all color coded. You just match the colors from one end to the next end. It's not rocket science. It's really pretty simple. So, and since we're going to be completely rewiring this with new connectors, we can just come in here and snip right down the middle. Now that I have both of those harnesses separated, there are going to be some wires on this that we're not going to use, such as this steering wheel remote wire. We don't have that on that truck, so I'm just going to put a clean cut on that end of that, and we should be good to go like that, as well as the power antenna, which is already taped up, so we don't have to worry about that. But as far as everything else goes, I want this to be as clean as possible. So what I'm going to do is trim all of these to the same length, and then we can move on to the next step. I've got most of these trimmed to the same length, and I'm going to do the same to this other harness. That way we don't have a bunch of jumbled up wires, and it looks a whole lot cleaner. So now we're ready to move on to stripping this wire to prepare it to connect, and I'll show you what I like to do here. Like I said, these are my favorite set. You might prefer to use that other set, but as far as I like, just put it in there and barely give it a little crimp, or not a crimp, but barely apply any pressure to it, and it'll skin that wire nice and clean for you. And typically that's all I do, is about no more than a 1/4 inch. And then I'll do that for all of them. I'll give you a demonstration on how this one works. Basically all you do is set it in there how far you want it to be stripped back, and this side's gonna hold the wire for you while the other side does the stripping. And just give it a squeeze. If you want to take off more, you can stick it back in there. Those work handy when you're at the bench, but if you're in a tight spot underneath the dash, it's a lot easier to get these in there. So just keep that in mind. And like I said, now I'm going to strip all these back, and then we can get ready to connect them. Actually, instead of making you watch me do 12 or 13 of these, I'm going to show you how to do one, and then you get the idea. So, like I said, this is the first time I've ever used these solder type connections, and I'm not exactly sure how good that outer coating is going to be. So, for the power wires, as far as the 12-volt red, the constant memory, which is yellow, and possibly the illumination wire, I'm going to add a piece of heat shrink to the outside of that as well, just to have a little peace of mind in case something was to happen. So the general rule of thumb when it comes to heat shrink tubing is that it normally shrinks to half of its size. So I'm going to assume that the same applies for these type connectors. And what I've done here is picked out the piece that fits it the best. And like I said, once I heat this down and that connection is done, I'll slide this over and give it a quick shrink down. That way we just got a little peace of mind when it comes to the power wires. And as far as putting this stuff on, you got to kind of think ahead. So I'm going to run the heat shrink tubing down on this wire first. Then I'm going to feed this connector through. And a lot of people, they'll stop right here and just heat shrink it right here and be done with it. But if I have enough slack, what I'm going to try to do is twist the wire up and then pull the connection over top of it. If I can, I might have to trim some more back. Yeah, I'll trim a little bit more back off of this. This might take a little extra time to do it this way, but I'll feel better about it knowing that not only is it soldered together in the middle, but it's twisted up as well. This may or may not work. We'll see if it goes over. So yeah, that looks like it's going to work. So what I've done, you can see that I've twisted that wire together in the middle, and now I'm going to be able to take my torch and melt that solder in the middle, as well as shrink this outer coating, and then we'll wait till that cools off. We'll slide this heat shrink tubing over the outside and give it a quick shrink, and that should be it. I forgot to mention in the tools that it's worth noting that you might need a good torch or a heat gun, or possibly use your old lady's hair dryer if it gets hot enough. But these torches, they're relatively cheap, so that's what I like to use. Just back the flame down as low as you can get away with. You don't want to melt the wire, you just want to melt the solder in the middle and the heat shrink tubing. So we'll give this a quick melt, see how it goes. Pretty neat, if I do say so myself. And like I said, what I was concerned about when it comes to the power wires is I'm not sure after melting that how thick that plastic coating is going to be. So that's why I want to add that extra piece of heat shrink. So we'll give that a second to cool off. Give it a little test tug. And then we'll be ready to put the heat shrink coating over it. So far, it looks pretty good. Now we'll just slide this extra piece of outer heat shrink over it. Give it a quick melt. And just like that, y'all, we got a nice, clean, safe, professional looking connection. Now, it goes without saying, be careful when you use this torch, because you're working in confined spaces here, especially once you get 10 of these wires connected up. But if you feel safer using the heat gun, that's probably a better route to go. I just been doing it like this for years, and just take your time. Don't get in no big hurry, and you'll end up with a nice, clean, professional looking product at the end. So let me finish these last 12 or 13, and I'll see y'all in a second. Give y'all a look at the 3 hot wires. I've got those connected and heat shrinked, protected nice and neat. Now we can move on to the speaker connections and the ground. For those, I'm just going to use the solder connector. I'm not going to put any heat shrink coating on the outside. Mainly the only reason I did this for these is because they're constantly carrying 12 volts, and on the off chance that they would short out or chafe up against something metal underneath the dash, that way they don't ground out. And what you end up with is a nice, neat, professional looking harness that is not overly bulky, and we can take this one step farther. So if we wanted to make this thing look even nicer or tidy it up a little bit, we can grab ourselves a couple of zip ties and just tighten up the harness a little bit on both ends. And what that's going to do is give it some stability, as well as keep the wires from getting hung up on anything else. And then I'll come in here with a pair of flush cuts. These are perfect for zip ties. It gets nice and neat up against that zip tie, and no sharp edges. That way if you're working underneath the dash, you ain't getting cut up by jagged zip ties. And just because I got it laying around, I got some of this nice mesh wire loom that I'm going to put over top of this to give it an even more professional look. Now, I don't know about you, but I say that looks 10 times better than what we started with. It's very well protected, whole lot better connections in there, and now we don't have to worry about any troubles underneath the dash when we plug this bad boy up. So out here at the truck, y'all, I'm getting ready to take this radio dash bezel off. It's about 8 of these torque bits that holds it on, and then it just pops loose. It's got some retention clips behind there, but I'm going to go ahead and remove that, and then we can tackle getting the radio, the factory stereo, out of here. Unfortunately, the tape deck does not work. If not, I'd keep it in here because the radio part of it plays good, and just for the nostalgia fact of the cassette player, I've got a small collection of cassettes in there, but nonetheless, I got 3 times as many CDs, so we're going to throw just a slightly newer radio in here. So just to make sure I didn't lie to you, to get the dash bezel out, it's 8 of those T20 torque bits, and then you got 2 Phillips head screws that's hid down here below it. And to get to those, you got to drop the bottom steering column panel there, which is held on with 2 5/16. That's in my case, so may be different in your situation, but didn't take long to get that dropped down. So now we got access to the stereo, and we can remove this original unit. And it's only held in with 2 5/16 bolts, 1 in each corner here, and we can pull this old unit out. Now, before you get to this point, it's a good idea to go ahead and disconnect your battery. I like to disconnect both the positive and the negative side, just to make sure there's no juice or electricity flowing through any of the circuits at all, because Some of these stereos have a separate ground, like a separate chassis ground, and if you just disconnect the negative side of the battery, they might be grounded somewhere else. So I like to go ahead and disconnect the positive side as well. That's just a precautionary thing. But now we got those 2 bolts removed, we're ready to yank this whole stereo out. And a lot of times on these factory units, they don't give you much slack at all. So the first thing I like to try to do is disconnect the antenna wire. And a lot of times that's where some of these Chrysler products receive their ground from. With that antenna disconnected, we got a little bit more slack to work with. There we go. There's one. And this one has a separate ground cable, so we'll disconnect that. It looks like it might be a 5/16 as well. This is pretty common on Chrysler products, that they have a ground strap run to the radio back here. This might actually be a 10mm. And it is 10mm. So we'll get that unbolted. And I'm not sure if this is the factory radio or not. The reason I say that is because it's got some weird $2 sticker on it. It's got the original Chrysler part number on it, but it has also a $4.99 price sticker on the bottom. So I don't know if somebody picked this up at a yard sale. Very possible. These come out in many different cars. So now we've got that out of the way, we can see if our wiring harness is going to match up, and then we'll see about the dash kit we got. And lucky for us that the wiring harness does match up, so that's a score there. And I actually think that the dash kit out of that Jeep is going to work as well. These kits are made to fit multiple vehicles, so sometimes you might just have to break off a few extra tabs. So you can either trim these off with a razor blade, or if you got a decent set of pliers, you can most time snap them off flush. I apologize, y'all, for the blood. Hope that don't make y'all queasy. It's done turned cold on me out here, and my hands stay so dry during the wintertime. It's easy to take some meat off of them. So yeah, I'm gonna snap these off. Got to snap off that top one to make it clear, and this one on the side, and I think we'll be in business. So I got those snapped off, and we can actually go ahead and mount this into the dash. One key thing you want to make sure is to run your wiring harness through the center of that. Same thing for the radio antenna. Try to do this without getting blood all over everything. You can stop and get a band-aid, but it's in a weird spot. And then we can just reuse the factory mounting hardware. Actually got this upside down. There, it's more like it. You can reuse the factory mounting hardware and bolt it back up. You don't want to over torque these. This is just a little flimsy plastic mounting thing, but now I got enough slack to plug my antenna up. And kind of push some of this harness back in the dash. That way we don't have to fight it And a lot of people on these Chrysler grounds, a lot of people will try to tape the ground wire around that, but I'm going to show you that once we plug this radio up and that antenna plugs up, that we don't need that. And now we're ready to test this thing out. We can plug up this harness. You want to reconnect your battery before you do this. And we can plug up this antenna. And now when I roll the key back to accessory, we should get some action. So we know we got power. Now we're ready to slide this bad boy back into the dash, because we don't have any amp or anything else to hook up. So now we're good to go as far as that goes. I like to try to tuck all my wires down into the dash, so once we push this back into its cage, we're not pinching anything or causing anything to bind up. You can see back there a little bit. Try to train this wire how I want it to go down, and it'll follow it. It'll follow itself down there. Once you push this back far enough, you'll hear it click into position, and you know it's good to go. There it went. Nope. Sometimes you might have to remove this faceplate, this trim, to get it to click in, but you should hear an audible click. Okay, I pulled it back out of the dash to see why it wasn't locking into place, and like I said, all this stuff is secondhand. It's used, so these locking fingers, you got one on each side, they were kind of stretched out the opposite way, so I just kind of bent them back in, and now we should be able to hear it click into position. There we go. Just like that. And that's what holds the stereo into the dash, keeps it from sliding out under hard acceleration or braking. So now we can remount this whole assembly back into the dash, and that should be its permanent home. And now we can go ahead and pop back on our trim ring to give it that nice finished look. And I'll grab the dash bezel and reinstall it. And just like that, y'all, we got the dash back in. It looks nice and neat. All this is just hand-me-down parts that she was going to throw away. So we got CD player now, Bluetooth, hands-free calling, all the jazz, you know. A little bit of time, some basic hand tools, y'all, and some general wire knowledge. You can apply any of this to any other automotive electrical project, like fuel pump relays, fan relays, anything electrical basically on a car. Just take it one circuit at a time. It's not that complicated. Just don't get discouraged. There's plenty of wiring diagrams available on the internet now, thanks to Google and YouTube. So there is a wealth of knowledge out there when it comes to this subject. And I'm not saying everything I do is right. This is just how I've been doing it for years, and I've never had an issue with it. So I had to run in the house and grab some Duke Cannon Bloody Knuckles. Not sponsored, but this is some good stuff, y'all. If you got dry hands during the wintertime, mechanics especially, pick you up a tube of this stuff. It works wonders. But anyways, thank y'all for watching. We'll see y'all in the next one.